giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles, with Dawg Nation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chaffins.
Hey there, and welcome into On the Beat. Cody Chaffins, Mike Griffith with you in our last show before it's game week. So excited about next week. And Mike, being the newsman, the proper newsman I am, we'll start with the latest tonight. We've had a couple of stories break during the day today. Want to get your take. First, AP All-American team comes out. One dog on the AP first team. Did you see this yet? Have you seen it?
I have not. Not
okay.
At the moment, no.
So as we were recording this, it just came out. Brett Thorson, first team punter. Nobody on offense or defense. Second team, you had two defensive guys on there. No offensive players. Who do you think?
C.J. Allen, Christian Miller.
Christian Miller, K.J. Bolden.
Oh.
Getting some love. And Peyton Woodring also, second team kicker. So those, your AP All-American. We've covered that a little bit now. The other news that came out today was that Auburn has decided when Georgia comes to town, that will be the day they're going to retire Cam Newton's number, just to cause even more of a frenzy at Jordan Hare. Thoughts on Auburn picking that date, as Georgia, I guess last year had Auburn as their homecoming date. This year Auburn maybe trying to hype up their crowd a little bit.
As long as Cam Newton doesn't go under center, I don't think it makes much of a difference. If Cam Newton went under center and played like he used to play, it is interesting timing, though, to retire Cam Newton's number. I mean, he played in a Super Bowl years ago. That would have seemed the opportune time. Maybe he received his final installment check from his signing. I don't know.
Only three other Auburn players with numbers retired. You've worked on that. You've been on a lot of beats. You've been on that beat. Can you knock them off for me? Auburn retired numbers.
Oh man, no! It's
one's
been
easy.
So long.
34.
Oh yeah, Bo Jackson. Okay,
yeah, Pat Sullivan and Terry Beasley.
Pat Sullivan, Heisman Trophy winner, Terry Beasley. Yeah.
Okay,
they ought to add. They ought to add Stad White to that list. Stan led an undefeated season in 1993. Which I think is one of those lost seasons. I'd love to see a 30 for 30. Remember that team was not on television. They were not allowed on television. Crazy. Best team you never saw. Only undefeated team of the 1993 season.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, fact of the day. Also, the end of the Auburn talk for On the Beat today. We got a lot to get to on the show. We're going to talk about scrimmage number 2 and the questions we still have after that scrimmage has concluded. We'll also hit some other stuff. We'll do some Oppo research in today's show. Mike going to break down Tennessee has named their starting quarterback. Georgia going to look forward to seeing him on September 13th. A big injury at Alabama. How could that affect Georgia? And then, of course, we'll start looking ahead to Marshall because Georgia is starting to game plan for Marshall and other teams down the way, I'm sure. Let's also talk about the Big Ten. Are they trying to ruin college football? And finally, tonight, we'll help you out as you start to do your fantasy football drafts for the NFL. Which dog should you take and where should you take them? We'll talk a little bit about that before the end of the show. But, Mike, the big story over the weekend, that second scrimmage. We had so many details on last week's show about the first scrimmage. Details not as numerous this week, but we still have some questions out there. I guess first and foremost, the big priority for this Georgia football team all offseason, everybody has talked. Mike Bobo's talked about, Kirby Smart, every player we've heard from, run game. Being able to run the ball and stopping the run. What's our run game? That's still kind of a question mark for this Georgia team after that second scrimmage.
Well, it is, but at least the backfield seems a little bit deeper. You know, Rod Robinson, and you saw Georgia put some pictures out. And as far as the intel, I think it's important to note that if we're going to report secondhand information, which we pretty much have to, let's face it. I mean, pretty much all of Georgia coverage other than the games is secondhand information. Usually Kirby Smart is the one delivering the secondhand information, and he chooses what to say and what not to say. He's not going to go, oh, wow, George Pickens made a heck of a catch. Going back to that video that leaked, which I believe was an intentional leak, by the way. So unless I have someone very credible, I'm not going with it, right? I had more than one credible person at the first scrimmage. This one, not as many sources. And so kind of stuck with what I knew. And that was a fast start, which I know a lot of people are going to be happy to hear about. A Dylan Bell end around that gained a big chunky yardage. Noah Thomas making another highlight catch, this time a high point in the ball. C.J. Wiley continuing to emerge, and Rod Robinson and Nate Frazier getting some work. So maybe the frontline backs getting a little bit more work. Chauncey Bones, of course, started in the first scrimmage. We remember Kirby Smart kind of threw water on the tight ends, performing well at his press conference last week, saying they're supposed to catch the ball. Nobody broke a tackle. So, Kirby's got his own way of qualifying things, and he will again tomorrow. But for now, what you need to know is a faster start for the offense, more competent play at quarterback, receivers continue to emerge. And I think those are the key things that you want to hear about this Georgia offense that may be finding itself a bit more. And of course, Juan Gaston continues to emerge as a potential starter freshman at right guard, as Kirby talked last week about him needing to get in more shape and lose weight to sustain. At the very least, Juan may be starting that first game. We'll see.
Yeah, really interesting there. You talked about the depth in the backfield. Can you go into more details what we're hearing about some of those guys? Last week was a lot of talk about Chauncey Bowens. Talk about some of that depth back there in the Georgia backfield.
Well, I think it's important that they've got a physical back. They were missing that last year. Now Etienne can bring you a lot of juice, but remember he was injured and he was a little bit lighter. And of course, Frazier was a little bit more east-west. I think he's being a little more decisive and maybe running behind his pads a little bit more. But we liked it when we heard about 225-pound Chauncey Bowens, and we like it even more to hear that 235-pound Rod Robinson back in the fold. Now, Cody, you remember the 2024 G-Day game, and Robinson was moving the pile. No, nothing flashy, but there was a frontline Georgia defense, and there were 3 or 4 guys on him, and this guy was powering forward for 1, 2, 3 yards. And those yards are hard to get, to be clear. And if you can do that on a frontline Georgia D, that's the 3rd and 2. That's the 3rd and 1. That's the 4th and goal from the 1. That's what's been missing. So really important that Rod is back, especially as we've heard that Josh McCray, the transfer from Illinois, didn't really come in up to speed. Now, Kirby said it was an illness. He's mentioned conditioning. This is a big guy, 240-pounder. So the transfer from Illinois, maybe still getting his footing. And that's okay because it's a 15-game season. And let's face it, they don't play Tennessee till the 3rd week of the year. So still some time, but you like hearing that there's all these bodies and all this competition. And for the folks that wondered, yeah, Cash Jones is back there, but Cash Jones is not a 3-down back. You're not handing off to Cash on first down. When he runs it, it's going to be a 3rd and 7. When he's in the shotgun, you may hand it off to him on a sprint draw. You may throw it to him on a little loop, or you may leak him out downfield for a pass, but he's not a true prototypical running back, but he is part of the running backs package, as is Dwight Phillips, another smaller, faster guy. So I would call those guys kind of gadget and situational guys. I don't think they're your tried and true 3-down backs. And as we look at what George is trying to do with the run game, and Kirby said it, we need our run game to help our quarterback, okay? Gunnar Stockton's going to run a very different version of the Georgia offense this season than Carson Beck ran last year. Gunnar, not your prototypical, prolifically sized, tall quarterback like Carson that's going to see over the line and fire downfield. You're going to see moving pockets. You're going to see some RPOs. You're going to see some quick throws, but you're not going to see the same sort of conventional pro-style offense that we saw last year. So things are going to be different. You're still going to need that run game, and you're still going to want to stay on schedule with the run. So it's 2nd and 5, not 2nd and 10 with a drop pass, or 2nd and 8 with a 2-yard carry. 2nd and 5, 3rd and 2, stay on schedule, keep that defense and run pass conflict where they don't know what's coming. And as Todd Monken once told us, that's when the explosive plays come.
So, yeah, and running efficiently is what Kirby Smart has talked about. Being able to run the ball when you need to run the ball.
That's it.
When it's 3rd and 1, we got to get it. Let's be able to line up. And they know we're going to run it. We know we're going to run it, and we got to be able to do it. Something that's going to be huge this year. You've already mentioned 2 freshman names. I remember it was a few weeks ago on this show. We kind of did our superlatives before the season, talking about all these different things, players that are going to shine. And one of the things we talked about was which freshman will make the most impact this year. And you and I had on that date talked about Elijah Griffin. We talked about Bo Walker. And I think those guys still have a chance to be a huge impact. But then we've talked a lot about Juan Gaston now, who's potentially a starter on the offensive line. And you also mentioned C.J. Wiley, big wide receiver. Obviously, his dad played in college. He's been around, played at a big-time school at Milton, state champion there. So we're hearing about other freshmen who could be contributing, and especially if Gaston becomes a starter on the offensive line, could have more of an impact than any of the other guys.
Yeah, ultimately, I don't know if he's going to play the whole game or how many snaps, but the big thing, Cody, when we look at Georgia and how they've done it in the past, it's been very much by committee. We can point to 21 and 22, and We know the offense started with Brock Bowers. We've talked to opponents from other teams that said, man, our whole game plan was finding 19 and trying to scheme around him. And we know the importance of James Cook and the explosivity that the newly minted $48 million man had. We think about the big 60-yard run in the national title game that kind of turned the tide there late in the third quarter before Georgia scored their first touchdown. Stetson Bennett obviously came up clutch. We think about the fourth quarter against the Ohio State, some of the throws that he made in the fourth quarter against Alabama in the first national championship game. So different guys, different times. So I don't get hung up so much on which one so much as does Georgia answer all the questions. And if it requires freshmen to do that, if they're capable, that's great. It could be which transfer makes the biggest difference. Well, it could just depend on the game. You think about last year and, ETN made a big difference against Texas. Where was he against Ole Miss, right? I mean, different guys at different times. So I don't get hung up so much on that. It is good to hear that CJ Wiley sounds like he's going to find his way into that rotation. Now, the question I have, and this is one of our questions, and I hope I'm not giving away our segment too much, but how many snaps does he play? Because in Georgia's offense, they like these receivers to be able to play all the positions so they can move them around. Will they simplify things to get CJ Wiley on the field, or is he going to be able to pick up that much that fast? Remember, they get to do more with these guys in the summer than they used to, and he did go through spring drills. So, one of my big question is, how many snaps can CJ Wiley play, and can he get in what's typically been about a 6 or a 7-man rotation?
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially you consider Talon Taylor, a 5-star, comes in from Illinois, is not playing Georgia high school football in 7A or 6A as it is now. You do wonder, did that put Wiley ahead a little bit? Probably playing in a complicated offense, played with Luke Nickel, who was a college D1, went to Miami quarterback last year. How much has he been trained by the great Terrence Edwards, who's on Dawg Nation Daily weekly on Thursdays? So he's been trained by these guys who have pro and college experience. Did he start a little bit ahead? And like you said, been able to do a lot more throughout the summer. He's got the big body to do it too. I think that really helps. The other, one thing that we've talked about, which actually hasn't been talked about a whole lot, and Brandon Adams talked about it on his show this morning. We talked about it last week. The defensive line, and there's just not a lot of buzz out there, but to me, if you are somebody who gets invited to one of these practices, I'm more watching CJ Wiley run a cool route and jump up and catch the ball than trying to figure out on the D-line, did he stuff his gap correctly?
Well, I'm not going to get into everyone's particulars. I know this. A defensive lineman can do their job without putting a stat up. Right. You don't have to sack the quarterback or get a pressure to do your job. In fact, the way Georgia plays defensive line, and they build the wall, right? And that means everybody stays in their lane. Everybody stays in their gap and does their job. And that could mean press in the pocket, moving your man back into the quarterback where he's got to kind of move to the outside. Or it could mean, the quarterback scrambles right. Then it's somebody else's plate, but you've done your job. You don't get a stat for that. There's no stat that says held his gap or collapsed the pocket.
Or forced to play the other direction.
Yeah, and then somebody else cleans up. A great example of that is, Jalen Walker had a few sacks against Texas in Austin, right? But when you talk to Steve Sarkisian, he was talking all about Michael Williams. Like, oh my gosh, that guy just kept coming and pushing him out. And then Walker's there to clean it up in the open field. But without Michael Williams, and Michael doesn't get a stat for that, but he does his job. He contains, he pushes the pocket, he chases the quarterback into somebody else's arms. So I'm not as hung up on sack numbers as maybe other people are. And I'm not as hung up on buzz as maybe other people are, because from my experience, it's really about healthy bodies and gap control. And then it's up to the linebackers to do their job, right? When you hold your gap and you don't get pushed back, that gives the linebackers the angles that they need to get good pursuit and shut those runs down quickly. When the ends contain, it prevents those running backs from bouncing it outside. And then you got, your dog pile where 4 guys get credit for a half sack in the middle of the scrimmage. So, you look at Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis's numbers were not that incredible at Georgia. And yet he was one of the best defensive tackles in the nation. As he would say, 2 on me, somebody's free. He understood the team concept. So I think the defensive line is fine. I've seen those bodies out there at practice. I know that Kirby has mentioned Xavier McLeod. For Kirby to mention a defensive lineman, it takes a lot. He doesn't really like to throw bouquets those big guys away. I don't know if he's afraid to go out and celebrate with 3 sandwiches, but he really pushes those guys hard. They're really the blue collar workers of the team, and they have to be. We do know that Christian Miller has been disruptive. We know that. And we know that Elijah Griffin has flashed. If you got 2 guys that are flashing against what we think is a pretty good offensive line, and we know they have the depth with big baby Jordan Hall back in the fold and Xavier McLeod, the second-year transfer, South Carolina. This year he's healthy. Last year he wasn't. That's really good news. So I feel like Georgia's very solid on the defensive line, and I think they have enough star power. Now, when we talk about the edges, and the big news last week was hearing that Chris Cole might do a little bit on the perimeter. Look, they're not going to tell us what Chris Cole, and they're not going to be throwing pressure packages out there that they're going to do in week 3 against Tennessee or week 4, or, game 4 against Alabama. You're not going to hear and see. There's no reason for those bells and whistles when you play Marshall and Austin Peay. Leave that in the box. Don't show the offense what you can do with your different alignments. So I don't expect there to be a lot of buzz. It's probably by design, and I don't think maybe it's as much of a red flag as maybe other people think.
I'm curious, what other questions are you left with after finding out what you found out from these first 2 scrimmages as we look ahead?
Well, the safety position, we know that Juan Alguero has been cross-training there. Last year he was a star. Is he still a star? You hear about Ja'Cory Thomas, about the transfers, Maddox coming in. Who's going to line up next to KJ Bolden? What are the alignments going to look like? What are they going to do at the safety position? I'm not concerned about the battle at corner. Ellis Robinson or Daniel, either one. Can't lose there. Don't care who starts. You got 3 incredible cornerbacks that are NFL capable. Curious to see what happens at the star. Curious to see what happens at the safety position. Curious to see what your linebacker alignment looks like. Is it going to be solid 4-man fronts, or could we see a little bit more 3-4? Could we see some 3-3-5? There's a lot of different ways that Glenn Schumann can attack this based on the opponent's formations and the different personnel that Georgia wants to put out there. If you remember the Dan Lanning defenses, the no-name defenses of the past, as they called themselves, there were like 30 guys on defense that were playing regularly, but they had different roles. So I wonder how that shakes out. What's that substitution pattern going to look like at that second level with those linebackers, edges, stars, and potentially safeties moved up to the line? So how much cover 2, how much cover 1? What does Georgia's quote unquote best 11 look like? To me, that's a major question still.
And you talked about how Georgia, in so many positions, likes to throw multiple guys out there. I do feel like we're going to see, obviously, we'll see the backups against Marshall and Austin Peay if things go the way Georgia thinks they will in those games. But we might also see more just rotations of series by series in the first half of those games, as I think some of these competitions will continue week 1 and week 2 as they get ready for Tennessee. I think about Juan Gaston. Will they try and make him play a whole game? I wouldn't expect him to do that. So they're going to try Michael Uni in there. They're going to give, some other guys some chances at that guard spot as well. And same on the safety front. I think we'll see still guys going in there. And we really won't know that best 11 until September 13th. I don't get the feeling.
Right. That's defense. And then offense, the question is about the tight ends. Remember, I said Kirby threw water on those tight ends and said, hey, I didn't see a tight end break a tackle. Now, we think this is one of the best tight end rooms in the nation. That's what everybody keeps saying, but the head coach didn't come away blown away. He wants to see these guys get some serious yards after the catch. Yeah, he says, everybody, you're supposed to catch the ball when you're open. Kirby's not going to do a backflip over that. He wants to see the yards after the catch. Otherwise, you might see another receiver out there. I mean, if CJ Wiley's playing that, why not go 3 wide and 1 tight end, right? So how much double tight end are we really going to see? Are the tight ends going to warrant 2 spots on the field, or will we see 1 tight end and 3 wide receivers? And that's the competition that's going on between wide receivers and tight ends. And I think that's something that evolves, and again, largely dependent on the opponent. How strong are they? How many defensive backs do they have? When you go multiple receivers, do you tap into a weaker third cornerback on your opposition? Or do they just simply not have an answer for that Jaden Riddell second tight end, or Lawson Lucky in the Brock Bowers Joker role? So much of this is determined by matchup as well as your best personnel. It's a combination of those 2 things each week that the package is determined on those things. How does that shake out? I don't think we really good read on that really till midway through the season when Georgia's played enough games that you can kind of pick up on their tendency of what they like to do.
Any more questions that you have? And if not, then I'm curious what answers you feel like we've gotten through scrimmages 1 and 2.
Well, we know Branch is going to be a dynamic receiver. We know he's the $1 million man. Are they really going to put him back on kick return? That's a big question. He's a very valuable guy. And yet we still hear about valuable guys like KJ Bolden, maybe on the punt team, right? It wasn't so long ago, I think Zamir White got injured playing special teams, and Kirby took a question on that and did not like the question at all. I don't think anybody's asked that question again since because of that response way back in whenever it was, 2017, 2018, or 2018 when Kirby, kind of lost his stack when somebody asked him about him playing special teams. But he has made the point that they value special teams. And as I look at the NFL breakdown every week for the NFL Dogs, a lot of these guys that are playing in the NFL are playing special teams. A lot of guys right now, and we'll talk about this later in the show, that are fighting for roster spots. They're on all the special teams units. That's part of the formula for making an NFL club. There is value in knowing how to play special teams, and there's clearly value in that third phase of the game. And as Georgia looks to win a national championship, it's pretty obvious what some of the strengths are and maybe some of the areas that maybe aren't as strong. We know that Kirby Smart plans on winning that third phase of the game in special teams, and that means there's going to be some elite personnel out there. But does that mean you're going to put Zach Branch out there returning kicks, especially against Marshall and Austin Peay? Maybe do you use him occasionally? Maybe you save him for Tennessee, maybe you save him for Alabama, or do you use him regularly? And who's the punt returner? There's a lot of candidates for these spots that I don't think we've decided yet. The
Gunnar Stockton question has been a question all off season. And obviously we haven't seen him in a live game since the Notre Dame game. Have questions that you've had about Gunnar Stockton been answered through 2 scrimmages?
No, I haven't seen him play. Coaches can script practices however they want. We know there was an interception in the first scrimmage, but someone said, well, that was just the defense making a good play. Look, if Gunnar Stockton can throw the ball as accurately and make decisions as good as Jake Fromm, that will be a big win. I don't know that I think he's to Jake Fromm's level yet as a passer, a decision maker, or with his accuracy. We do know that he brings a little bit more mobility than Jake did, but he's not necessarily he's not Stetson Bennett. Okay. So get that vision out of your head. Stetson is quick as a squirrel and, just had a unique ability to turn it on, especially at clutch moments. Gunnar has not shown that yet. That's not a knock on Gunnar. I mean, he played the second half against a Texas team that led the SEC in many ways defensively. And then he played against the Notre Dame team that was prepared for him. Okay. They knew Gunnar Stockton would be the quarterback, and they were able to dial up defenses that played to his strengths and weaknesses, right? As will the first few opponents. The difference, Cody, is that now Georgia can design an offense around Gunnar Stockton's strengths and avoiding his weaknesses. And what does that look like? As I said, rolled pockets, some quick, decisive throws, maybe a little RPO action. But how does that play out in practice? So I need to see more before I'm ready to, make any sort of, assumptions. And even then, Gunnar's the type of quarterback, just like Stetson, that will get better as time passes. The 2021 version of Stetson Bennett was not very consistent and had some bad games, quite frankly. He was good when he needed to be, but there were times where if that defense wasn't legendary, Georgia could have been in trouble. Gunnar doesn't have the benefit of a defense like Stetson Bennett had in 2021. I do think, though, that he will get better, just like Stetson did, with game reps. I mean, this is a guy that's been in the program for years, but there's nothing like doing it on Saturdays. And I also don't think he has the supporting cast Stetson had. As good as these receivers have been, I'm not ready to see they have anybody equal to Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers, or James Cook for that matter in terms of explosivity. So Gunnar's got to do a little bit more with a little bit less of a defense. And I think his progression needs to be a little bit quicker because the schedule is going to really pick up after the first 3 games.
So still questions remain out there, and we won't really know the answer until we see some game action. We're going to talk about who they're going to be playing in that game action in just a minute. We'll get to that after the break. It's On the Beat, presented by Ingles.
It's time to discover the convenience and time savings of contact-free pickup with Ingles Curbside. Just visit shop.ingles-markets.com or download the app. and your Ingles personal shopper gets to work with specialized training on how to select the freshest items for a pre-scheduled pickup. They'll even text you with updates. You pull up to a designated space and your personal shopper delivers your items right to your vehicle. Fresh, fast, and affordable. It's all in the bag. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Appreciate Ingles being a part of the show. Well, in politics, a lot of times when you're running against a candidate, you got to find out all the dirt on the other guy and figure out how you can get after him a little bit. It's Oppo research. It's something Mike's been doing as he looks ahead to some of Georgia's opponents this year, and there's some headlines coming out from some of those teams Georgia will play in the first month of the season. We'll start with Tennessee has decided to name a starting quarterback in Joey Aguilar. He, of course, was the transfer from UCLA, actually from App State, where he played a year ago, threw for over 3,000 yards, 23 touchdowns, 14 interceptions for the Mountaineers a year ago. A little different in the SEC as opposed to the Sun Belt, but it seems like that Josh Heupel has his man.
Yeah, and this is a guy that's played a lot of football, right? I mean, he's, as you said, I mean, career-wise, he's already thrown for over 6,500 yards and 56 touchdowns, also 24 interceptions. So this is a guy that's going to sling it. We'll see what sort of decision maker that he is. One of the things about Nico, while Nico Lamiavia was a very good runner, I don't know that Aguilar can match him in that sense. I don't know that his arm is as strong, but if he's a better decision maker that gets through his progressions quicker, he could cause just as much trouble. Now, Georgia has not had an issue with the Josh Heupel offense. He runs the hurry-up offense. I don't think anybody's better than Kirby at the hurry-up defense. Tennessee, that said, has beaten Alabama 2 out of the last 3 years and Florida 2 out of the last 3 years. So, the Vols are doing something right. I wonder a little bit about their receiver ranks, but to your point, I think it was just a matter of time before they named Aguilar the starter. The way that worked out, like you said, he had a cup of tea with UCLA in the spring and pretty much a trade for Nico and Aguilar. But that's going to be a very interesting game in Knoxville, the third game of the season. The Vols, of course, open up against Syracuse in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium and that kickoff classic game. And then they got kind of a breather against East Tennessee State. So they'll have a couple games under their belt. And of course, Georgia with their games against Marshall, 73 new players for the Thundering Herd, by the way, and a new coaching staff. That's quite interesting. It kind of works both ways, right? So Georgia doesn't really have a book on these guys and what they're going to do because all this personnel is so new. They can take a look at what these coaches did at Jacksonville State, North Carolina State, respectively, the coordinators, but really doesn't have a book. So they'll be making a lot of adjustments in game while also doing the things they want to do to work on themselves. And then, of course, the other big news, and I thought even bigger, Cody, was the Alabama running back injury. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but when a team loses their frontline rusher with a collarbone injury, you don't know. And apparently they're hoping he gets back for the Georgia game on September 27th.
Yeah, and the big question is, are you coming back for that game? How up to speed can he be and game ready, and how much of an impact could he make as Alabama, of course, comes to Sanford Stadium in late September? You talked about Marshall. Yeah, they had to – remember last year, Sun Belt champs, but then had to cancel the bowl game because, everybody left. So it's going to be interesting. But I feel like Georgia going to be very vanilla for the most part anyway, and what they're trying to do, very base-oriented for their offense and defense that day. So, and it may not make a difference.
And think about this. I mean, Justice Haynes, who went to Alabama, remember that controversy? A lot of people thought he might go to, he transferred to Michigan.
Yeah.
So he's gone. Last year's number 2 is gone. So the leading returning rushers for Alabama right now, Richard Young, only had 146 yards last year. And not a lot. And then after that, Daniel Hill at 61 yards. So that is a really green backfield for Alabama. Georgia fans are saying, how do you like it? That's what Georgia went through last year when Frazier was the only remaining scholarship back, incoming freshman. So that could really put a dent in Kalen DeBoer's offense. I know the pass game looks pretty good, but if they don't have an experienced tailback, they're going to have to get creative with how they run the ball.
It is a reminder that the depth on these teams is not what it ever has been before. A guy like Justice Haynes says, I'm going to go somewhere else where I can make some money and play a little bit. So it reminds you that everybody's just an injury away. A little more on Joey Aguilar. I'm curious your thoughts on, because I remember Hendon Hooker in that offense could be really good. It seems like the quarterback is the key cog for Josh Heupel, and he's got to have a lot of trust in that guy and can kind of make that guy play better than maybe his skill set say he could play.
Well, a lot of it's scheme oriented, the way they spread the field and put those receivers out wide. They really spread you out. And it really leads the way if you have a dynamic running back. Tennessee's had some pretty good running backs that have been able to capitalize, kind of like Steve Spurrier did in the 90s with the fun and gun. He'd spread it out, and you'd see Fred Taylor tear it up pretty good. I don't know that Tennessee has a running back like that. And honestly, Cody, I don't know what the receivers are like. And you think back, they had some pretty elite receivers when Tennessee was in there. Hey, of course, Jalen Carter had other plans and didn't give him room to breathe or get the ball off. And of course, the Georgia fans, made Sanford Stadium just louder than any stadium I'd been in, despite what some of these recent stadium rankings suggest. I don't know who's doing these stadium rankings, but they obviously haven't been to Sanford Stadium for the Tennessee game or Notre Dame game. But I do think that Georgia's in a pretty good position in that game if they don't beat themselves. This is where the run game kicks in. This is where Kirby said we need our running game to help our quarterback. I don't think you want to put Gunnar Stockton or any offense really in a catch-up position, but especially a young, inexperienced quarterback who's going to be making his first ever road start. So to me, that's why the run game has been such a priority. Once you get that run game going and you're able to knock out, 2, 4, 5 yards on every first down, get yourself on schedule, set up a makeable second down, third down scenario, everything takes care of itself. Play calling gets a lot easier. Receivers catching passes, right? Running backs falling forward for an extra yard or two. These are the things that have been missing in the past for Georgia that I think we're going to see this year.
Our little Oppo research right there. Good stuff, Mike. We'll continue that with your 30,000-foot view when we get into the season. Another kind of news thing that happened over the week, there's been this, draft of an idea from the Big Ten about proposing they go to a 24 or 48 team college football playoff with lots of auto bids, no conference championship games. The Big Ten just keeps coming up with all of these things. Do you feel like these guys are just trying to ruin college football?
I feel like Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, he came from Major League Baseball, and I just don't feel like he really has a sense or an interest in the tradition of college football. I think he wants to make money, and more teams in the playoff makes more money, right? More playoff games, more volume, more ratings is how they're looking at it. And maybe that's true, maybe, but at what expense? At the expense of the regular season? I don't like that, and I really like you. I kind of resent some of these ideas. Maybe eventually we get there in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the game does evolve. But I'm not ready for this. I mean, we just went from 4 teams to 12 teams, and we were talking about 16. Now we're talking about 28 in a racing conference championship games. This is something I'm going to be interested to ask Kirby Smart about. I think there's a value in the SEC for the league championship and the league championship game. Now, if you take a look at the Big Ten's history of league championship games, it's not very rich. It's been very lopsided. It's a top-heavy league. The best teams were on the eastern side. There's been a lot of blowouts. I think for a while there, the average margin of victory was like 20 points. That's not the case with the SEC championship game. We've had some classics, and I think there's some value to the SEC championship game. I enjoy that game. Could you keep the championship games and still have a playoff? Yes, we've proven that. But in the Big Ten's world, there's play-in games that keep more fan bases engaged deeper into the season, thus higher ratings. So, for the lunatic fringe that doesn't follow college football on the regular, that kind of turns the dial to whatever's on the schedule. Oh, it's Masters week. Oh, it's Wimbledon week. Oh, it's the Super Bowl. Oh, it's the NBA, championship series. For that fringe fan, they may be interested in this. But for the pure college football fan, I don't think they want any part of this. I think we want to feel like the games we're seeing each Saturday are sort of their own playoff games, right? Every week is a playoff in college football. I think that still holds true even with 12 or 16 teams because of the championship game format. And I think the league championships still matter in college football.
Yeah, the whole idea of it, like the Big Ten already kind of did this because now they're playing Oregon regular season, right? That feels like it should be a college football playoff game. You're playing Southern Cal, and so if you expand this even bigger, it's gonna be a bunch of SEC teams playing SEC teams anyway. The way it should, if it goes the way it should go. So what different, I don't like the idea. And we've got, like you said, important Saturdays throughout the fall for the SEC schedule that don't need to be, messed with.
Well, now, the interesting thing is, you may get some support from some of these college coaches that want to keep their job because more playoff spots mean a greater
Yeah.
likelihood of them coming back for another year. But if you don't make the 12 or the 16 playoff right now, you're either in or you're out. With 4 teams, it was like, okay, well, that's acceptable. Only 4 teams made it. But now that there's 12 and 16, there's a lot more expectation. I mean, look at Ole Miss. That was a failure in the world of a lot of Ole Miss people that put all that money out for Lane to buy all those players, and they still didn't make the playoff, even after spending all that money on all those free agents. So it's going to be interesting to see, if college football cannibalizes itself with greedy coaches. If Greg Sankey and the SEC takes a stand. We already heard the Big Ten trying to legislate 9 games for the SEC, and then we see 10 SEC teams in the top 25 and only 6 from the Big Ten. It's like, yeah, no, this is why we're not doing it. So to me, I don't know where the power is at. Beyond that, we know that the SEC and the Big Ten are kind of the 2 conferences that have been legislated to have more decision-making power. But if the SEC is not on board with this, I don't think it can happen.
Yeah, and I think Greg Sankey will hopefully throw his weight around a little bit and let him know this is not going to work for the SEC. Talk about some of the big Saturdays throughout the fall. It is a big one coming up September 13th as Georgia goes to Knoxville to take on the Volunteers, and we'll be headed up there as well. Our Dawg Nation invasion on the Tennessee River is filling up fast. You got to be one of the first 125 if you want to get one of those awesome Dawg Nation Invasion t-shirts that say Sink Rocky Top. Well, I can tell you it is down to single digits if you're trying to get one. You want to ensure yourself that you can get one of these t-shirts. You want to sign up probably tonight. If you're going to do it, make the decision tonight. DawgNation.com/tailgate. We're going to be up and down the river on a riverboat. We've got the food and drink taken care of with all the crazy dog people be barking all, and then you head off and get into Neyland Stadium after that. But it was a great time a couple of years ago. Mike can attest to that. So you want to get in there now, DawgNation.com/tailgate. It's getting almost too late to guarantee yourself a t-shirt at this point. Only the first 125 get that. And like I said, it is the getting pretty close to that already. So want to make sure you hop on that while you can because you don't want to miss out on the Dawg Nation invasion. DawgNation.com/tailgate. You can get those tickets today. As we wrap up the show today, Mike's been talking a lot about fantasy football kind of off the air. We've been kind of hearing him talk about which dogs he likes and a lot of folks are doing that fantasy league draft this week as you get ready for that season to start in a couple of weeks. So as we look at things, there are some obvious dogs out there I think people will gravitate towards. Brock Bowers, the highest scoring tight end last year in the NFL. Ladd McConkey surprised a bunch of people. If you drafted those guys last year, you really did yourself a favor. So tell me about what you're thinking. If you want to have a dog, because everybody wants to have a dog on their team just because it feels better if you're a Georgia fan having a couple of Georgia players on the team.
Well, I will say I did win my league with Brock Bowers.
There you go.
McConkey. So I had a little insider information there. You're not going to get those guys late in the draft this year, though. Bowers is, likely going to go somewhere in early to mid second round is tight end number 1. The thing that makes that a tough call is there's some other, from a practical standpoint, there's some other tight ends that can score for you, right? I mean, George Kittle and McBride or a couple other guys are going to put some points up. I believe Brock Bowers will be better than ever with Geno Smith as his quarterback and Pete Carroll. And of course, they got Ashton Gentry, the guy from Boise State. You get that run game going, and we've heard Kirby Smart talk to us what a running back can do for a tight end and play action. I feel fine about taking Bowers where he's prescribed. Not sure about your draft strategy. Ladd McConkey, I know the left tackle's out. I know they added Keenan Allen. But that offense is still going to run through Ladd McConkey, okay? That's more insider information. He's still going to be wide receiver 1. Some of the steals I think you can get, though, I really like DeAndre Swift. And I know him and this offensive coordinator didn't end well before when the coordinator was in Detroit. But I like what Caleb Williams, second-year quarterback, I think the Bears are going to do a little bit more. Swift, we saw what he could do here. He's a home run hitter. He can catch the ball. He's got a great talent at quarterback who's more experienced now. I like George Pickens. I think Pickens is going to break out.
Now in Dallas, right?
I know that's his favorite team. He's got Dak Prescott throwing it. Prescott likes to put a lot of air under the ball. George has been mired in this run-heavy offense in Pittsburgh that just drains you if you're a fantasy owner, unless you had Najee Harris during those years. Nick Chubb is going to have an interesting opportunity. Now, some mixed results here. We've heard John McClain, the longtime Texans writer, say Chubb doesn't look like the old Chubb. Well, maybe not when he saw him. but Joe Mixon, the starter, is probably going to be out. So Chubb's got an opportunity. One more chance. Can he do it again? We've seen Nick Chubb come back from injury twice. Can he do it again with the Houston Texans? He's going to have that opportunity. And here's one. Keep your eye on the waiver wire. I wouldn't draft Stetson Bennett, was one of my 2 quarterbacks, but you better believe I'm going to keep up with Matthew Stafford's help, because if Stafford can't go, and I know Garoppolo's the veteran, but they really like Stetson out there. And you saw what he did last week. And think about Stetson as a fantasy football quarterback. The Rams have fantastic receivers. Okay. Number one, that's first and foremost. Just like Stetson had Adonai Mitchell to throw it up to, you got to have guys to throw it up to, right? He's got guys to throw, and Stetson will run the ball. And you know he's going to run for if he gets the opportunity. So watch for Stetson, monitor that quarterback situation. If Stafford's out, keep a close eye on that quarterback situation. He'd be a great pickup if he gets an opportunity. But for me, it's all about, and of course, if you can't decide on one dog, Cody, there's a very simple answer. Draft 7 of them and take the Eagles defense. Now, I know that the Eagles have a very difficult schedule this year. And unfortunately, in quote unquote Super Bowl week, they play Buffalo, which is not exactly the offense you want to see your defense matching up with. But they're too irresistible for me. I'm going to grab the Eagles defense if I can. When that run starts on defense, if somebody else doesn't take the Eagles, if I can get them as the second or third defense off the board, I'm going for it, because Azeez Ojulari is flashing right now, and Smile Munnon had 5 tackles. That's 2 more dogs on top of Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith, Nakobe Dean, Keely Ringo. So Eagles defense, another priority pick if you're a Georgia fan.
All right. I saw on Twitter the other day, Arian Smith go up and make a huge catch for the Jets. I'm sure the Jets feeling good about him. What do we think about Arian Smith late, or do you wait and kind of see how they use him? Because they've got, Justin Fields as a quarterback there at New York. Garrett Wilson, Josh Reynolds, Alan Lazard.
Technically, Justin Fields is a former Bulldog. If you really, Justin Fields has been awful productive. The problem with Fields is you can't go into the season thinking he's going to be. He's had some injury history. He's had some inconsistency early in the season, and the Jets receiving core other than Wilson, I don't know how much they really have. I wouldn't be afraid to take Fields as my second quarterback. As far as Arian Smith goes, maybe a waiver wire ad if he shows he can do it consistently. It's good that he's off to a good start. That's impressive that he's made some catches, but the Jets don't really excite me a whole lot. I think there's some better options out there. And then as far as James Cook, we didn't really talk about James.
Oh yeah.
$48 million. That's great. That he's not going to be able to keep up that touchdown production. That was an inordinately high number. He'll probably go back down to the year before, had about 9 or 10. So I don't really see him as being a top 10 running back. Anything outside the top 10, 11, 12, 13. I'll take Cook. I think he'll be consistent. I just don't think he's going to win you a league championship this year. I don't think he belongs in the first or second round.
Are you a fan of a fun fantasy football team name?
Not really. No,
you're not going
no.
Lad to the bone?
No, I
rock
don't do
solid.
I listen. I take this stuff serious, Cody. This is serious business.
Pickens your poison. I'm coming up with some of these Georgia.
Pickens your poison. That's
or Pickens and Grinning. I saw this. There's some out there. It's always weird because sometimes you'll make that name and then you don't get that guy in the draft and you're stuck with let him cook. Thank you, Kaylee Mansell. Let him cook if you get James Cook.
Oh, my gosh.
Could be kind of rub-a-dub Chubbs I saw, but I don't think that was
Stetson Hatters.
There you go. It's good to have some fun with it. All right, so we will be wrapping up here on the beat as we get ready to hear from Kirby Smart again coming up on Tuesday. That's the day after this show has aired. Mike will have a recap of the best things, the most important things Kirby said in that press conference, what that means going forward. So look out for that on our Dawg Nation YouTube channel. And next week on this show, we will have Kirby's first game week press conference we'll be reacting to, and we are all talking Georgia and Marshall next week right here on The Beat.